So this session is a bit, let's say, a more niche session, if you will, which we're going to discuss nature-based solutions for wastewater treatment. We're coming in from two different projects here. We have the multi-source project represented by Pedro. Pedro can say some words about himself when he gets the mic. And we also have the NICE project represented. My colleague Karin is representing NICE. I'm also involved in the NICE project, but it's actually about collaborating. And we would like to use the opportunity here today to discuss a little bit the decentralized approach for wastewater treatment. And you're gonna see, we're gonna set the scene and talk a bit about the centralized approach versus the decentralized approach, and then we can, you know, hear maybe from you and also give our views on the topic, and relate it also with the European policy framework. Next, please. So I'm gonna give the mic to Pedro now.
Yep. So to set up a bit the scene and make sure, because this topic is a bit niche, we'd like to actually understand a bit more to whom we will be discussing this topic with. So I'll invite you guys, if you could join a Menti session. So you have the QR code there, or you can also just go to menti.com and insert the code that stands there. So I'll give you guys some time to get your phones. Oh, yeah. And while you start accessing it, I need to jump actually to the Menti and get it. Coming. 2907 3928. Yeah?
It's a bit small, it's up there. We can read it again. Do you have it? Yeah? Great.
Cool. So, just a bit about yourselves, where are you coming from?
Brazilian connection. No, just Germany, Serbia, Spain, Basque Country, UK, France, and we have 2 times Brazil, which is impressive.
Nice. And actually a bit more about what you do. So from which sector are you coming?
We have 1 company in the room, 3 coming from universities, 2 research institutes, and 3 others.
Good.
4 others. I put other in mine. Yeah, because ICLE Europe, we are a city network. So I was not sure which one to. Who's here today? This is the field, right?
Yeah. So what more or less you guys have studied or worked with?
Can we do 2?
Yes, I don't know. I'm actually not sure. Sorry.
Only 1?
Maybe I should have allowed 2.
Oh, no, it's okay. Okay, if I have to choose.
Yeah, we have. So, and the topic is actually not necessarily very clear, I suppose, to some of you. So if you think about decentralized approaches, as we have on the title, what do you think of?
Yeah, that would be interesting to see. The first words that pop into your mind. We're doing Menti. Should I tell you the number if you want to join? Mm-hmm.
Well, interesting. I can see that it's going to be a funny discussion.
Interesting.
Without authority is provoking, I would say.
I like that. And anarchy. The commission is gonna kill us. Yes, it's menti.com. And then I can tell you the number. Because this is interesting really to see what pops into your mind when we talk about decentralized approaches. Are you ready for me to tell you the number? 2907 3928. It's a little bit small for you to read up there. Do you have it? Now we know that you're going to put the new ones. Marta, you're an artist. What do you think about when you think about decentralized approaches? Yes, of course. 2907. Yeah, 2907 3928. Change of paradigm. Yeah.
We have plenty to come back here and discuss this if you want to.
I have to make a picture of it, wait, just to be sure. It's really great. Yep.
So I think the next one is the last one of the series. So in the context of the decentralized approaches, what topics would you think it's more relevant to address? So water quality, public health, integrated resources management, business models, just a few.
Water quality is winning. What? Do you agree, Karin?
With water quality, definitely. in the integrated resources management. It's also an important topic.
Yeah.
We will discuss that. Wait for it.
Think we have it, right? Yeah. Oh, it's still changing.
We have more people in the room now, so.
Great.
Thank you for the input.
Now we have to jump back to our presentation. Thank you, Pedro. So before we jump into the topic, we want to contextualize it a bit. I wanted to talk a bit about the power of clustering. So all of these Horizon projects, they have tasks now for clustering. It's a way the Commission found to make sure that we can work across projects and not only competing for the same call. And so we have tasks for cluster activities in the NICE project and also in the multi-source project. And this is key because we can produce joint outputs, through clustering. So it's important that we, in such events, that we do sessions together and try to work with what comes out of such a session to produce. It can be a policy brief, it can be a brochure, or another product. So I just want to highlight here that the Network Nature project that now is going to become Network Nature Plus, it's really pushing for the active participation of these projects in task forces and events. And who knows, maybe in the future we can do a task force on wastewater treatment for nature-based solutions. It's not changing. This side? No? Yeah, no. Super. It changed there? Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so you see here, this is a slide of the landscape of NBS projects. It's actually not up to date. We are about 50 NBS projects now. We are well above 300 million euros. We have, I would say, 1,000 partners, and 57 countries was back then. We have a lot more than this now. But you see here, the topics they focus on are very varied. So you have here international restoration and rehabilitation of urban ecosystems, climate and resilience, that was the first generation. Then inclusive urban generation, that is the Clever Cities project, EDICITNet, ProGirec and UrbanNet, you saw in the panel this morning. Then you have projects working with insurance value of ecosystems. There's one that is not here on the screen. It's called NetTrans. It's also trying to look into nature-based solutions and the insurance sector. And you have, of course, the multi-stakeholder platforms. And here you see that I put in red at the very bottom of the page, NBS for the sustainable urban water cycle, and here you have multi-source and NICE. So just to, locate these projects in this bigger landscape. Next, please. And now I'm giving the voice to Pedro.
So with this, we'll go into briefly introduce a bit both projects, and we're going to say it briefly because the idea is to actually promote a bit of discussion and go to some of actually the challenges that we've been identifying. So I'm here from Aarhus University in Denmark. I'm Pedro Carvalho, I'm associate professor, and I'm working a lot with water quality issues. And I'm representing Multisource. So Multisource stands for Modular Tools for Integrating Enhanced Natural Treatment Solutions, or in other words, nature-based solutions, where we have been doing some, let's say, technical developments in the urban water cycle. And what does that mean, actually? So Multisource is very broad in the scope, but the approach is that it can facilitate the systematic city-wide planning of different nature-based solutions to allow both water treatment, storage, but actually also reuse. So on one side we have nature-based solutions, we have some innovation that actually deals both with technical at the NBS small scale, but also actually at the planning scale. So we have colleagues working with actually planning tools, nature-based selection tools for your situation where you want to do a certain type of water management, and that will help you find the best solution. We have tools for actually GIS-based city planning, where you actually can help you try to locate, for instance, within a city area, where we would like to place a nature-based solution. And actually, there is also some work being done in terms of models, in terms of these planning tools, actually to have an overlaying layer if you want to place one of nature-based solutions in this region, actually how much that can actually affect your sewer systems. So that's what we call a disconnection tool. So if we start disconnecting some of the current pipelines that we have in the cities, how much that will affect actually the overall hydraulics of the pipelines in the city scale. And these are, let's say, the big drivers in multi-source and what is happening. And to come back to the wastewater treatment and this decentralized solutions, I would like to just bring you to actually to the pilots that we're working on, because the pilots are very specific, and you'll see that actually a big part of them are dealing with wastewater. So urban waters, we could easily separate typically in the wastewater, and then we'll have everything that is rain related, that at a point will become runoff as it is flushing through our streets. And in some situations where we don't have separated sewers, we will have combined sewer overflows. That means that we will have a very big mix of rain that is just mixing up with the wastewater and generating problems. You'll see here grey water as well, because there is, of course, the view that we can do some source separation and then address the sources or the type of streams separately, and that may be better for sometimes types of treatment, but also the reuse. We do have some pure enough, and we also, of course, have some rainwater, not because we need to treat rainwater for the purpose, but the logic is it can also be a source that we can actually use further and do some reuse with it. So all the pilots are in different locations. There is different technologies behind this. So a lot of it is based on treatment wetland technology, but not only. We have European cases. We actually also have a case in the US that is actually treating wastewater from a ski resort and is doing this treatment under minus 20 degrees. So it's very extreme conditions that are also interesting to look at the details of the technology. We do have a case of grey water treatment, and we are also looking at vertical greening infrastructure. We also have some rain gardens, and in Germany it's not clear from the picture because actually the picture was before the implementation. We have some green roofs for the rainwater management. But how does this all come together? So what we're seeing is that, of course, we do have the technology to deal with these solutions. To deal with this water, but we're seeing some challenges. And of course, in the urban scale, we used to work with centralized solutions. And of course, it doesn't mean that we need to do full decentralization, but the logic is if we want to increase the way we use natural systems in our cities, water is an important factor because by default, all green infrastructure requires water. And if we want to do things on a sustainable way, we know that we might need to actually use some water sources and not depend purely on pure, very clean drinking water to actually irrigate green infrastructure. And that cycles to actually, we have a proposal for a new directive that deals with wastewater treatment, and that kind of imposes a challenge, because this proposal, and you'll go further into this, does not consider actually nature-based solutions or green infrastructure. So it's very disconnected. So it's still very much the classical centralized big systems approach, and in a way we see kind of this double velocity at the EU level, where we have, in a way, business as usual, and on the other side, as we all hear, more nature-based solutions, thinking different, how we can work towards the sustainability of our cities. So that said, why decentralized solutions? And it's not a solution for everything, but they can address some things. So I collected a few statements from a few scientific publications where it's proposed that decentralized solutions can very probably be a long-term winning strategy for, from a perspective of energy efficiency. When we put more water together and we need to take it for the centralized plant, we typically are putting a lot of energy to pump all that water. So if we do smaller scale systems more locally, we avoid all that pumping needs. There are other points, so if we want to do reuse, we don't need to pump twice. And then if we do local treatment, we also have possibilities to adapt the treatment for the intended reuses. So that opens a different variety of treatments and approaches to how things are done. And in the end, it doesn't need to be just one or the other. We can also have hybrid systems and try to benefit from both, and try to reduce some pressure, for instance, from the centralized systems. So one case that we have interesting on the multi-source project is actually the case study in Italy, where actually it's a CSO approach. So basically it's a centralized wastewater treatment plant that installed a big treatment wetland to address the CSO. So you have this combination of a classical infrastructure and actually together with it, because the wastewater treatment plant is very close to a natural area, they found this intermediate, actually let's put an added treatment that actually mimics nature and will allow us to address the CSO, this combined sewage overflow, instead of just bypassing the plant and going straight to the river that passes by. So this is another example where the combination is actually quite interesting. That said, of course, there are challenges, because not everyone likes the idea that we should just treat wastewater locally. And that is the biggest challenge that in general we have. So we do have a few questions that we have an opinion on, but actually we would like to have your input. So we would actually like to know what you guys think about some of these challenges. So the first question is actually, how does your city currently manage wastewater, and what are the main challenges and the limitations that you see with the current existing centralized approaches? Yep,
I'm sorry. I don't think I need. Do you hear me? No. For the streamer. Okay. Sorry, I don't really like microphones. So I think, at least in general, I think the biggest problem is in cities that private water utilities do the management in a centralized way. And I think it's very challenging to make this centralized approach more like an opportunity for them than a competition to the way that they have been doing forever, the management of water. And I think we are in the path to understand and to find ways to do this transition. But I really think it's challenging, and I don't have the answers for that. And I think it's really like the biggest issue here, at least in cities that have a private management of water. Yeah.
Gillian, go.
I'll talk to you about Glasgow. We have Metropolitan Glasgow Strategic Drainage Partnership, which is trying to bring together the 8 councils around the Clyde, because the Clyde is a bit like, it's not as long as the river that's out here, but it does wind into the hills. And if you get a flood event up the top, it can cause problems in Glasgow or further downstream. We are trying, our water guys are really good. It's public sector, so it's Scottish Water, Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, and then a combination of them working with the local authorities trying to do this Metropolitan Glasgow Street drainage. So they're trying to deculvert, so they're trying to do a lot of the nature-based solution stuff, and they really do talk to us. but the land that they want to do it on has multiple demands over it. So I am having interesting conversations about writing a forest and woodland strategy that says trees for water, which is about where we plant trees that can slow the water down. But I can't plant trees until they're ready to do the water, deconnect things or do something else, because they might have to dig the trees up again in order to put the water solution in. There's also, I need to know how many trees in our canopy cover are under threat by water management that's going to go in, because I've got politicians telling me I've got to keep the tree canopy cover up. There is then, where's the water going? How's it connecting in? Who's connecting in? What water supplies have you got? In a rural authority I worked in, I can remember a developer telling me that everybody moving into a new development was taking their water needs with them. So the capacity wasn't going to improve, wasn't going to increase. They were just going to move and take their sewage volume with them and their use of water with them. And you went, what? Huh? But there's also the problem we're getting wetter and warmer. Or we are getting wetter and warmer in the north of Scotland. It's rained for the last 3.5 days, and Storm Agnes is incoming fast. The ground is getting saturated. The combined sewers are not coping with it, and we are not building buildings that are adaptable to flood. So if you look at the wonderful waterfront here, and you compare that to Glasgow and its financial district, the ground floor of the financial district is a no-go area, because that's the flood defence. So we are not creating places for people to live with water properly when we're thinking about some of the solutions. I used to say nobody plays football underwater, so we use pitches for flooding. But Scotland tried to play football underwater about 2 months ago. Can't remember against who, but Hampden literally flooded and had to abandon for an hour. But there was about, 10 centimetres of water on the pitch. But mostly you can do multifunctionality, but it's understanding that and talking to people. And there's a heck of a lot of silos around. Sorry, I waffled.
Thank you.
Maria has a comment.
Thank you. So I'm from the city of Larissa. My name is Maria Nicolaidou. I have Agnes. We had Daniel like 10 days ago, and now we have Elias. So we have two guys visiting in 2 weeks continuously. So in our case, we are a medium-sized city, and we have a separate network of rainwater and wastewater. So the management of both systems are made by the municipal company of wastewater, and for the city of Larissa there is a main treatment plant, but for the rural areas and the smaller towns around it, the municipal company tries different kinds of pilot, let's just say, projects, which also answers kind of on the second question. So there are a lot of different kinds of water treatment, and the treatment and the treated water to be used locally. But the main issues, on the one hand, we had with the centralized system, is that, for instance, in the Daniel storm, the area of the treatment plant flooded. So what are you going to do? You need to figure out a way to protect the infrastructure, because then the whole situation goes not so good. So this is one of the issues, because the plant, the treatment plant, is in the area that was actually the third in place to flood. So you had two barriers, and they both flooded, and the third one flooded. So what are you going to do? Build a fourth one? I don't know. So this is an issue. And also, one of the other issues that I see is that in some cases you need to be constantly aware of what the situation is in the whole city. So you cannot isolate areas to fix something or replace something. So you need to go around a very complex protocol on how to, figure out how to circulate wastewater while doing change of infrastructure. So this is on the top of my head, like.
Thank you. Someone else wants to share something?
So Katrina from Groundwork London. So in London in 2013, we were part of a Life Plus program called Climate Proofing Social Landscapes, where we were doing demonstration models on climate adaptation, which included looking at rainwater and the downpipes on social housing estates, and looking at different nature-based solutions such as everything from green roofs to swales to green walls, and using those as kind of demonstration models to showcase how that could be implemented in other estates across London. That brought together a partnership with one of the water companies, Thames Water, and since then we've really been working with a number of water companies, but mostly on looking at, and most of the implementation has been about combined sewers and splitting the combined sewers primarily in housing, so in housing stock going to people's homes, looking at how we can build a rain garden in their front garden, or looking at new models that we could do within a housing setting, but also in highways, looking at streets. That work has gone beyond London into the south of England. We also have been looking at a model where schools have a lot of grounds that are flooding, and looking at how we can do interventions. Some of that is just, again, looking at downpipes and looking at how we can put a nature-based solution attached to that to divert the water runoff from the system, but primarily around flooding and the combined sewers.
I think that's a good point, and I'll pick up on that, because what we have seen for the majority of the cases, and we have very good examples, of course, is the climate adaptation projects, the runoff, the rainwater, the management, and we see that, of course, and it's natural that it's been like that. Of course, we don't see the same development from a wastewater perspective. Makes sense. So the issue, and that's what Multisource tries to address, is these local needs and this reuse, because it's true we need to be ready when we have excess water, but we also have the droughts that are becoming more common, and when we have all this green infrastructure around that we want to keep and preserve, that's an added challenge that we do have, and that's where the wastewater treatment by nature-based solutions can also be interesting. Of course, it does not go on the same dimension. It's another level of complexity and security, because we need to still safeguard public health and, of course, the water quality in general. But it is a possibility, and what we see is that it's a much slower process, because it's wastewater, and everything with wastewater is a very slow process. But that's a bit part in the nature of it. But it was very nice to actually get your feedback on the different challenges. I think for the sake of time of the session, we probably can get back to some of these discussions, but I would say that we continue to the next points of the agenda.
Yes, the next point of the agenda is Karin, here my colleague. She's gonna talk a bit about NICE and what they're doing, and put some challenges and some ideas that we can discuss again after she presents about the decentralized approach.
So, hi everyone. I'm going to be, let me present myself. My name is Karin Nasib. As Daniela mentioned, I'm her colleague. I'm working at ICLE Europe, and I'm part of the NICE project. Next one, please. So the NICE project brings in this idea of how to use nature-based solutions in the integrated water management framework, and how they can be used for circular urban water and to capture and retain and treat water at the same time. The goals of the project are to develop standards, guidelines, methodologies that can be used to test innovative solutions, creating business models that will take into account social, economical, and environmental benefits, and identifying barriers and opportunities in the current regulatory frameworks. We're going to look into this aspect a bit more into detail across the session, and also to raise awareness with different stakeholders in terms of co-creation. Here in this slide, you can see also some examples of the solutions that are being developed as part of NICE. There are hybrid subsurface wetlands for wastewater treatment, implementation of rain gardens for stormwater management, and also combined system overflows, and green walls and vegetable roofs for grey water treatment inside buildings. Next one, please. Just to give a short overview of the geographical distribution of the NICE pilots. The pilot cities are called urban real labs, and we can see that there is a very broad variety. In total, there are 11. And there are some other cities that are called fellow cities that will be like a second step of pilots that have 7 cities in total. We can see that there is a very broad geographical distribution. We have some cities in Latin America, in Colombia, in Ecuador. There is Cairo, and we also have in China the city of Kunming. So a part of all the other European cities that gives us a very broad geographic distribution. Next one, please. So to focus a bit more the discussion into the policy framework, just to have a bit of an overview of the European landscape in terms of water management policies, we can see that first of all we have the European Green Deal that presents this kind of a roadmap on sustainability, and one of the very core aspects is water. As part of the European Green Deal, we have the Zero Pollution Action Plan that mentions how to deal with pollution into 3 key areas. One of them is water. And also there is a Circular Economy Action Plan where we can touch upon the idea of having wastewater as a resource. Now going a bit more into the Water Framework Directive. As part of this, we have several other directives that come into place that should be considered. We have the Drinking Water Treatment Directive, the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive that we're going to look into way more detail, the EU Floods Directive related to water management, the River Basin Management Plans, and the Water Scarcity and Drought Policy. Now we are going to focus a bit more into the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. The current status is that we have a directive that has been in place for more than 30 years, and it has a very strong focus on domestic wastewater sources and the use and control of centralized wastewater treatment plants. According to this directive, the member states have to ensure the proper collection and centralized treatment of domestic and industrial wastewater. Currently, 92% of wastewater in Europe is treated until a satisfactory state, according to the current standards. And these standards are based on 5 parameters that are currently regulated, that are the chemical oxygen demand, biological oxygen demand, total suspended solids, and nutrient concentrations that are nitrogen and phosphorus. However, as I said, there's this 92% that it's being satisfactorily treated. There are still some remaining pollution sources that come mainly for smaller agglomerations. The current directive only enforces the treatment of wastewater treatment plants that are above 2,000 people. So whenever we have smaller systems, they are technically not obliged to satisfy certain limits. We also have individual appropriate systems that refers to these smaller systems, in which it is only mentioned that they should meet satisfactory criteria, but it does not have perfectly established limits as for bigger systems. And finally, we have the stormwater overflow and urban runoff that in cases that there are peak flows, they can be just directly diverted to water bodies and can generate certain issues. So this directive is being currently revised. The idea is that they are going to broaden the scope of the directive to also include smaller agglomerations. So right now it's only 2,000 people equivalent. It's going to include 1,000 people equivalent, but we should take into account that below that value, it's still not strictly regulated. There will be new obligations toward these more decentralized systems. And there is a further reduction needed on the nutrient loads for stricter values for nitrogen and phosphorus. And there will also be a monitoring of emergent pollutants, including microplastics, micropollutants, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and viruses. So now the idea is to see what are the gaps in the revised Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive and NBS implementation. We can see that one of the issues posed in the directive is that sanitation access has to be ensured for the entire population. In this case, decentralization can be a good way to get more rural and peri-urban areas where we have lower population. So maybe a new type of system can be implemented for them. Also, as it was mentioned previously, nature-based solutions are still not referenced in the revised directive. Even though at a strategic level it's always mentioned, it's still somehow lacking into the laws and more implementation kind of policies. NBS could play a key role in the treatment of emerging pollutants and the further reduction of nutrients in the wastewater effluents. And there is a very key aspect to NBS and the centralized systems, that is the circularity of treated wastewater. And this is specifically not that covered into the revised wastewater treatment directive. So how the centralization can be a solution? As I mentioned, the smaller agglomerations can be covered through a decentralized system. Stormwater overflow can be managed in a better way using NBS. That in this type of systems, normally they are a bit more reliable or can handle different overflows. And for urban runoff and these changing flow regimens that I was mentioning. So the idea is that these decentralized solutions do not replace centralized treatment plants, but that become kind of a support system. So this way they can somehow solve the issues that are not being covered by the centralized systems. And again, this aspect of circularity, of using wastewater more as a resource. I'm going to go a bit more deeper into this aspect. In this diagram, we can see that in the normal treatment cycle, in a more centralized approach, wastewater is produced, it goes to a treatment plant, and then it's released once again in the environment. But through a decentralized water cycle and the application of nature-based solutions, we can somehow reutilize water even inside the urban cycle, but apart from it. Actually, there is an EU regulation on minimum requirements for water reused, but this is more focused on agricultural irrigation, which is one of the most demanding sectors, and of course is into a very difficult position right now because of climate change and on other threats. However, this framework still has some gaps in terms of water reuse because it's only looking at at agriculture, but there are other possible reuses beyond this area, more related to industrial and also into the domestic landscape, where it can also come into place and where it should be regulated to facilitate also the public acceptance of water reuse resources. So now we come to the questions of discussion, and after this brief overview, we would like to invite you to give us your ideas. In terms of policy, what could be the potential barriers or concerns that you see for adopting a decentralized approach?
Any guesses? Gillian.
The question of who pays. So we had to change the law in Scotland in order to get nature-based solutions paid for by water companies, because where do they manage to, and where does the Parks Department manage from, or where does the developer pay for? And the other bit is the complications if you're getting a developer or somebody else to do it for you, or a third party. If they then employ a third party to manage it, how do you manage them? So we have complications in the UK where the developers have had to provide the open space with the sustainable urban drainage within it before the legislation changed, and they appoint a third party to manage that, and the residents can't sack them, appoint somebody else because they didn't employ them in the first place, but they still have to pay the money. But it's that who pays. The other bit is how to manage, and if you understand how it's managed. So some of the stuff that's put into streets, if you don't actually take people with you and change their behaviour and their understanding of what it does and what they're scared of, so risk aware, they may well be a barrier to the solution actually working.
So lack of awareness, lack of knowledge can be one of the potential barriers for decentralized approach. Maria?
Yeah, something else to add to what Gillian was talking about, but in a level over, like in a legislation level. The idea of decentralized approach is that you can accommodate smaller quantities of water, localize it in a specific area and use it locally. Now, legislation and ordinances can only allow you, in Greece at least, to use treated water in specific ways. So if the use of water is something that in your mind you would like, for instance, to irrigate a local park, and the legislation says no, you cannot do that, there's an issue of how you can create the infrastructure and follow through with the
reuse, right, Maria?
Yes.
You're talking about the reuse
Yes.
of the treated wastewater.
So this is something that you need to figure out, and especially the people, the citizens must realize that locally treated infrastructure, locally treatment infrastructure, is not a threat to the area, because everybody wants anything related with waste treatment away from them. So this is also part of the awareness thing.
Can I just mention one thing that I find incredible with that? I know that the public perception of reuse of wastewater is always like one of the barriers. People are afraid of treated wastewater. There is one example, and you as a Portuguese guys, maybe you can correct me if I'm saying something wrong, BS here, but there is this beer from Lisbon. They created a beer from wastewater. Yeah, tell us about that.
I mean, I don't know a lot of details, but it's on this concept of resources recovery. Yes, wastewater has been used to produce beer in several different countries, and that's just a small example of what you can do with it for sure. So yeah. That's
Yeah, I find that really interesting because it's something that most people don't know. I know for you it's like, of course, Daniela, there are many examples out there. But, if you go to a normal citizen out there and you say, look, let's drink a beer together. And then you're there over the table and then you tell the person after they had their 5 glasses of beer, look, this beer is made with wastewater treated, right? So people are going to be freaking out and running to the hospital. And although it's completely safe and it's completely fine, so the perception is something. But then I ask myself, right, if we're talking about European legislation and you have such a directive as the urban wastewater treatment directive, they are not, they don't even mention it as if it didn't exist, right? And this is something that the nature-based solutions community should talk about. Yep.
Margot from, not from a city, but from a university. Maybe I missed something, but I'm not sure. I mean, I'm totally with you, and I looked at wastewater treatment in Africa, with wetland, through wetlands, because in this country they have a lot of wetlands. But how do you actually do centralized wastewater treatment in cities? I'm not quite sure how it's actually spatially manifested, established in a city, in an urban context. Can you answer this? Because I'm still, maybe give me some examples.
So standard wastewater treatment, depending on whether it's combined sewers in an old city, that means you've got a sewage pipe and you've got the down pipe. 100-year-old systems meant that the down pipe, the water coming off your roof, if there was too much, overflows into the sewage system, and then they blow the manhole cover. So when you flood a house, you flood it with dirty water. That means everything's got to be thrown out. That invariably goes to a tank, very big tanks under the ground, which they hope will, they switch them on, switch them off, slow the water down, etc. And then it's going to big farms, for want of a better description, somewhere near the river. So the Glasgow one's near the Clyde Tunnel, where these swirly pools do the stuff and whatever. Yeah. The decentralised is trying to separate, so the Glasgow version is trying to separate the sewage pipe from the grey water. So the water coming off your roofs, the runoff off the roads, shouldn't be going into the sewage pipe and into the sewage farm. We can treat that by slowing it down, by sticking it through soils that can clean it, or through trees that can clean it, carbon in the soils, carbonate or whatever. We can slow it down. Glasgow's built over 200 years worth of mine workings. Therefore, there's holes under the ground that if we know they can take the water can go into them and then percolate slowly. What we're trying to do is not have the sewage system blow. So why are we putting effectively 50% clean water into the sewage system, which is what we're doing with old sewage systems, because every time we get a flood event, we overload the sewage system in effect to cope with the overloaded other pipes. So the water coming off the roofs, the water coming off the roads, the water coming down the pipes should not be going into the sewage system. That's where you do the two things. If you can divert half of it to somewhere else and slow it down, you can save money on the sewage system. The sewage system, the other way, is the nature-based solution on that is to start grabbing the energy off it, because that's warm. As it decomposes, it creates energy that you can use to heat things like greenhouses that can be watered by the grey water that you're taking off. The stuff coming off the roads is contaminated, so it needs a bit more of a clean, but that's doable. That's my understanding of the difference.
Yeah, I'll probably try to clarify as well. So when we talk about decentralized solutions, we can also talk about on-site treatment. So you can have a single building where you try to do the treatment locally, and you could potentially reuse the water locally. We have actually very interesting examples in the European scale and elsewhere of actually new urbanizations that are thought to, suddenly you are creating a new neighborhood for 1,000 persons, and you already have a centralized system under pressure. You're doing on-site treatment. So actually, typically on the basement of the buildings, you are installing the treatment and sometimes actually having the possibility to reuse it locally or reuse it for the industries. That's for new build, of course. And of course, the discussion here is what can we do? And of course, for new build is easy, but in the end, also in the urban context goes to what is our local urban situation, because of course one thing is a very densely urban area with very high-rise buildings, and the other is urban areas with low buildings. So in the end of the day, it really goes down to the density of population that we have and the space available. And of course, it is a competition for space. So of course, and goes back to, it's not that decentralizing is the solution for everything, and that Karen was, I think, had a very nice slide on that. It's about how the decentralized options can help coping with some of these changes, especially on this perspective of lack of water and the need for use. So in the context of a cost action that we've been involved with, that was one of the big discussions that we have, because quite often, if you want to think about reuse, people would say, let's do it with rainwater because it's of course cleaner, so we need to treat less. But actually put some numbers into it. So if we try to find a specific location as a case study, doing all the water balances, and what we realized was that, meaning that would only give a percentage of the needs for the greening irrigation of the neighborhood that was under study. And it was not certain, because in a way, yes, it's there, but you never know when it's there. And is it a regular year or is it an atypical year? While if you work with wastewater, we every day use the same, so it's a more constant input. So of course that is the advantage actually of potentially working with treated wastewater for some kind of local reuse. But again, then we are with the competition of the space and in which context it is. But we see more and more, and I go back to the hybrid systems and the coupling, because it's true, in the new areas we also see a lot of new things happening. And the new centralized options are also linked with source separation and actually also doing grey water separation. So there is a lot going on. The message here is more, in a way, nature-based solutions can also take part of that. And what is the limitations that we see with the nature-based solutions to be part of this change?
Exactly. Yeah, Joanna?
Just a little comment. In my opinion, it's not a question of deciding either go decentralized or centralized. It's more about how do we integrate it both, because the centralized system has a legacy, has an importance. No, there is like kilometers of sewage systems on the ground that it's being useful for so many years. So it's more a matter of how do we integrate this both approach. And I totally agree with Pedro that not all cases. So I think the key question here is where it's more interesting to have some decentralized approach in order to reduce, for example, the pressures on the sewage system and to avoid the problem of not having to treat the sewage after the overflow, but reducing the problem in the first place. And also there is the other side of the coin, because depending on the scale that we implement the centralized system, it can also become a technical problem for the centralized system, because we're going to have a much more concentrated wastewater to be treated in the centralized wastewater treatment plan. So it's a work that needs to be together, because we need to adapt a little bit the centralized in order to achieve and locate wisely the decentralized approach.
Yeah, and that's exactly why legislations should be positioning the two approaches in a more holistic way, right? Because if you don't have a legislation that is, recognizing, the added value and the risk and the problems, the constraints, the barriers, but also the benefits of this other approach, then it's like, we're the inertia of relying on centralized approaches will continue, and we know like how many through these projects we know how many innovations can pop up from nature-based solutions for wastewater treatment. I mean, Pedro can mention many, and Karin as well. But the thing is, then we are trying with these projects to make sure that we can create innovations there. We have nature-based enterprises in these projects, even creating business models. And the NICE project has many. Roger, my colleague, is working with these enterprises. And the Connecting Nature Enterprise platform, but then where is the legislative backup for them to risk themselves, go into the market, have all these innovative solutions, and legislation is not even so yeah. Maria.
I just wanted to make a comment, but maybe it can wait.
No, sure.
Really?
No, go for it, Marta. You have the mic.
It's coming back to this awareness topic. Well, I'm not at all an expert in water management, but what I was wondering, well, actually, I have like a common feeling that I was kind of missing in the conference, the waste management, not only the water management, but in general, in the MBS concept. And I wonder also if this kind of neglection of our waste management, both like Maria said, we want all waste management to go like really far, but couldn't we kind of create a bit of awareness if we start to reuse the water in our homes? Because I always think, why am I using, when I flush the toilet, this water, where is it coming from? I always get like so frustrated, and I think that we always think like super big, and suddenly, I mean, I suppose it's not a very, like compared to agriculture, it must be like not so relevant, but I suppose that if we started reusing the water from our own sinks for the toilet, just like so super simple, but this like simple action could also bring to our daily life like the awareness that this water is coming from somewhere and it's going somewhere. And I would just want to throw into the water bag, like I really think that we need to become aware of our waste print in this world. So maybe just like bringing it super local and super daily, this topic could help understand then the bigger projects.
Very good point, Marta. Thank you.
Yes, to continue to to what Marta was saying about awareness and not only seeing the big picture, but how each of us can contribute to this. We need to also discuss the awareness of the public sector, which are in the position of making decisions about selections and permissions and giving permits. I had a career for 14 years in environment impact assessment. And one of the main concerns in every colleague in every public sector concerning alternative waste management, wastewater management, was this is not tested. This is not this is something new. I'm not going to be the first to to say yes, go ahead. And this is something that builds on. So this is something that also needs to be addressed, I think.
Sorry, I'm a town planner. I'm going to talk about the UK concept. So there's building standards, which checks whether a building is safe or the thing is safe. That has one set of legislation, and the planning law has another set of legislation. And you need both legislations to change at the same time to allow you to do or force the developer to do the innovative thing in the first place. So you may well have seen the headlines today in some of the paper that the UK government English bit have given up on for another year biodiversity net gain because they said it's too difficult. There's a different law in different parts of the UK. So there's Scotland and others are going a different way. This the same. If they don't put it into the legislation to mandate the minimum, then we can ask for it as planners, those that are dealing with development management, but if it's not in the building standards, they'll go for the minimum building standards, not for the high level that we will have, because the building standard comes afterwards to check that it's legal to be built. So you need the legislation across Europe to kind of change and follow, whether that's planning and building standards or separate together. But you need that to change right across Europe and include the outliers like the UK, because otherwise they're going to compare and contrast and say, well, we've standardized our thing for the whole of Europe. It's a bit like the recharging plugs, because Europe said you have to have a recharging plug that's a USB-C. Just about everybody in the world is now going to have a USB-C, but it needs that bit of this is the standard. But if it's not in the law, then it's really, really hard to do, because developers will not eat into their profit.
Just a little comment on this topic. I think also legislation and normatives has also a huge impact in social acceptance, because when it's like we legitimate the reuse. So indirectly, society will feel more safe to go on board with this kind of new approach, because we need to remember it's new for everyone. So I think we need to also have this idea that normatives is also important in this context of legitimizing these new approaches. And in terms of social acceptance, okay, but also in terms of business uptake, because a company, if we want private sector to start selling decentralized nature-based solutions for water management, they need to have some assurance that they will be able to sell it something for reuse. And so I think there is this both aspects, social acceptance and also business uptake, that it's strictly related to legislation as well. So it's super important.
Yeah, just this a sec, because what Joanna was saying, it's the very case in Greece, at least in the tourism sector. So every new hotel needs to have a decentralized, a locally situated treatment facility. And they need to reuse the treated water within their own plot. So a few years back, they needed to fence the area that were using the treated water. And everybody was obligated to do that. So everybody was, why exactly are you making me reuse the water to water an area that I need to fence? So nobody is allowed on it. A couple of years after that, the law changed, and now everybody could walk and use the water. So it's very important because the businessman says, okay, I'm putting money on it, and you need me to do it. I'm obligated to do it. I have no other solution. And in the same time, you force me to give money, and you don't let me use my plot, which is yeah. So this is.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that kind of relates to what Marta said. You know, you're talking about wastewater treatment, you know, to make it clean and safe for reuse. But of course, you know, wastewater is so much more of a resource because it's full of nutrients that, you know, we have the technology to extract. And, you know, we need to be using those nutrients to make recovered fertilizers for use in urban agriculture. You know, so yeah, closing the resource cycle. And yeah, I'd like to sort of see more discussion about this rather than kind of just, you know, clean the water and reuse the water. Don't forget the nutrients.
Okay, so this is we do that in Larissa. In our treatment plant, the nutrients, the mud that is produced is actually dried and given to the local farmers. So this is very important. Info. Yeah, it works. So.
And I would just pick on that because that's something that has been discussed as well. That is, what is actually treatment? Because one thing, of course, is to say we need to protect our water resources because we are discharging to the rivers. We are, doing groundwater infiltration for drinking water purposes. So of course, we want to have it as clean as possible. But if we talk about reuse for a given purpose, for agriculture, maybe we want to keep some of the nutritional value, right? We don't need to, in a way, produce fully clean water. So those are some of the discussions that, as a big community, are lacking, because business as usual is we treat to the best possible or what the regulation demands for us, and the reuse in a way is set from this principle that after you have treated it to the biggest extent possible, you then ensure that it's safe to reuse. But then we are missing all this discussion now to do the recovery of all that is there. Same could be said for some energy recovery. So there is a lot of possibilities, and of course it will depend a lot on the local needs. And there should be more flexibility as well in that side to actually think about how do you set your local need? Of course, this becomes more complicated from a regulatory perspective, but it's also about having that possibilities to actually consider different uses and applications, and not just necessarily, one super treatment solution that should fit everyone everywhere.
Yeah, and the part of the reuse, if you think about the reuse of water and all this granularity, thinking about, okay, reuse for what? Are you irrigating your garden? Are you using it for safety water in case of fire of a building? Or are you doing it, there are interesting solutions that people are using, like for golf. They say these huge areas, with golf fields that, my God, are you going to irrigate that with normal water? For people to have their fun in the weekends and, to have these perfect green areas. Of course, you could be reusing. And some countries are championing reuse of water because they are forced to, because they have, of course, a huge problem with scarcity of this resource. So they are forced to be creative and see, okay, how can we, rethink how to reuse water? And they might have legislation related to reuse that is more mature. And can bring, some innovation in the field also for other countries that are, very rich in terms of water, and don't have to have that, kind of like worries that other countries need to have. So I think there is a lot also to learn from each other, from different approaches. If we look at the different ecosystems and in Europe, you could have there are many islands have amazing, legislatory frameworks for water reuse. And the continents can learn from them how they're using it and reusing.
Going a bit back on this point of wastewater kind of as a resource, the obtention of clean water that can be used for other purposes is only one of the streams, but clearly we can also use it for fertilizer production, not only the wastewater per se, but also the sludge that comes from the wastewater treatment plants that we currently have can also be processed in a way that can be used directly as fertilizers. There is also the possibility of bioplastic production, depending on certain other kind of wastewater streams coming from industries. And there are also certain industrial wastewaters that can be used for fertilizer production. So there is this idea of how the policy can somehow shape in a way that can help local governments and citizens and also the industries and businesses to understand how to best utilize the resources that they currently have, instead of just generating a waste that it's going to generate pollution and other certain issues. So it's a matter of how to change perspective. Gillian, please.
it's just spinning off on what you were saying, but also the comment about wasteland or waste, the other wastes that are there. So there's other nature-based solution projects that are probably looking at how you decontaminate land, but there's connections between the contaminated land and where the sewage treatment works are and where the cables and pipes go. And do we know where the cables and pipes are, so that if we're doing things, do we know where they are, what state they are, where they're going? But there's stuff where some of the nutrients or some of the chemicals that are being pulled out of the water or pulled out of the waste could help decontaminate some of the soils, because they'll do a chemical reaction with, and you'll create carbonate or kind of oxygen and carbon, and the carbonate's a great building product. There's been talk in Glasgow about taking the waste heat from the tenant's brewery, and can we use the waste heat, and can we use some of the waste product that's coming from the making of the beer to decontaminate soil elsewhere, as well as it going to crops. So we haven't thought properly about all the products we make, because we see them as waste or we see them as something else. So it's that language thing we've been using. We're using the wrong language to talk about what we're producing, because it's a production that we're doing. We're producing something, and what we use, how we then use what we produce in lots of different ways. At the minute, we produce and stick it in a hole in the ground and hope for the best, quite frankly.
I think, picking up on your point, it's really looking at these urban flows and how we can reconnect them and use the synergies. Because I worked on a project in this was in Africa, and we had some really technical people on the team, and when we talked about using wetland grey water treatment, because they basically in this city they have split sewage system. They have grey water and they have rainwater in Rwanda, and so they are extending the city, and they were saying, yes, so how can we reuse this grey water? Can we not use it for flushing toilets? And then the technical guys said, but then you have to pump it. And this also takes energy. So how do you get this? But of course, if you think in these circular flows, then you use solar energy. I think there are still ways of, integrating this. But you do have to consider all these urban flows, and I think it is also important to do an LCA assessment. So what is really the life cycle cost of different things? I think this should also be considered, because then you can really have a very informed normative approach. Not that everything has to be evidence-based, but still you need some sort of evidence to really underpin your arguments.
I think that what you're bringing with the time scale, I think we were talking about that even, Pedro, before the session, right? That you have to think about the time scale when you're talking about the centralized big facilities. They are designed really for a very, very long-term period of life, and then you have to also put time into equation. Right, if you have a wetland, how long, what are the processes that you need to do to make sure that system is going to be, really as long term as possible, and try to, compare, the time scale of the different systems. So the life cycle that you said, and the time scale, I think this is also something that goes into the equation to help decision making for what kind of approach to take. Yeah.
So I'm not from Rwanda, but from Torino. But when you were talking about that, I was thinking about something that makes me, I don't know if laughing or crying. I will tell you, and you will tell me what to do. Because Torino has 3 great plants when they do everything that we say before. But then we also have something that is an historical, is fountain, public fountain for drinking, that is called Tourette, because Torino means small bull. Toro is bull. Tourette is small, very small bull. And it keeps on giving drinking water 24 hours a day because it doesn't have any kind of closing it. But it's something that is in our history because it has like 150 years before the unification of Italy. So that means that if you try to put a tap on it, everybody is saying, no, you can't touch it because it's historical. And we have 800 of them. That means that 800, 24 hour, 20 liter per hour, something like that. Just make the count. That is drinkable water that goes directly in the public sewage because, of course, sometimes there is somebody taking that water for drinking. But so it's so many years that I try to use at least some of them for irrigation of the green areas. And it happens the same thing that you were saying because the technician in the same department where I work, they don't want to use that for the irrigation of gardens, so we don't have to eat that, the product of the garden, because they say that the solar panel and the pumping machine and everything, it's very complicated, so it's better not to do it. And now the head office of the company, the public company that is about water, that is called SMAT, they say yes, maybe, because we had 2 years of totally dryness in Torino. It didn't rain for more than 20 months. So you can imagine, we are surrounded by mountains, and we used to have a lot of water. So in the past, it wasn't a problem. Now is a big problem, because for 20 months without water and without snow, we didn't have any water for drinking. So now we are thinking about that. So they call me and they say, maybe your idea was not so bad. We can try with two out of 800 and maybe we can do something. So let me know if I have to cry.
Thank you, guys. This is a great discussion. Coming from a layman or a noob, I just have a question, and I don't know if it's been addressed. What about water rights and the theory of policy around water rights? Because in America, we have huge water right issues. Like Marta's idea is fantastic, but I can't even capture the water from my roof because I'll be fined quite a bit of money. Or when you guys talked about slowing the gray water, that's also not a possibility in certain cities because you're causing the water rights to be held up. So that would also be a ticket. Do you guys have those kind of issues or any policy around that or how to get around it?
Meaning, here it's true there is very different approaches to the water right, and I would say in the majority of the European context that I know of, it's basically it's on the public sphere to manage that. So that means that either on the municipality or a water utility that is most commonly owned by a municipality, they need to manage the water. And that means that they need to provide you with drinking water, they need to provide you with the treatment of your wastewater, and potentially they will also support on the stormwater management. And that means that you receive a bill and you, in theory, the responsibility is laying either on the municipality or this water utility that is doing that management. And that question does not raise. You do have some situations where people can have their own bores and have their own water wells. You see that more on the rural areas, but I don't know if at that level there might be some implications in terms of the ownership. But I would say not in general, in the European context, that is not actually an issue.
There's one thing that I just wanted to comment. It's so funny, interesting, that you're talking about Rwanda. They have like a separated system. Brazil also has a separate system. And I'm sure that Bucaramanga, I mean, the South American countries, I think most of them have it. And it's a little bit of a irony that, you know, that in Europe, because you did your sewage systems, of course, 100 of years before we did ours in South America, we have the separated system and you don't here, where you mix everything. So it's really interesting, yeah. Oh yes, and Larissa is of course with us. and were you in the Aros? Also in Torino? In Torino? Ah, that's great, because black black and gray. Yeah, the Aros municipality today in the panel we had before talking about actually public investment, but Marianne was telling that Aros is going to put a lot of money, I don't remember the sums, to separate their system. So it is that important, right? It is that expensive to mix everything and treat everything together that a city is really deciding in 2023 for the next years to say, I'm going to redo my system, my whole infrastructure, separate things so that I can deal better with water and the whole reuse and everything. So I think that's very interesting, you know, that it's so relevant.
Whilst we have combined sewer systems, it's probably only 20 years since we stopped sticking the dirty stuff into the sea. So I can go down to the bottom of my street, which is on the Clyde, in the Firth of Clyde, and you can still see the sewage pipe that would have gone out into the Clyde, and they were relying on the tide washing it away. So we've only started treating it properly in our coastal towns in the last 20 to 30 years. Before that, it went out into the sea, and you hope the tide wouldn't bring it back. It did. And we still have issues when it goes, because those old pipes are still connected to the combined sewage system. When they blow, I'm not sure whether Scottish Water, which isn't completely public, but down south in England, it's private water companies, and some of them have been fined for overflowing back in to the rivers when their systems can't work. So there's huge issues there about what you do with the old systems and how you manufacture a new one. And we haven't got the legislation right yet. So any new development in the UK, for instance, probably most European cities will connect to the existing sewage system. It's the same kind of debate we're having about heat networks and how you connect to them and how you multiply them up. It needs legislative change to kind of break the system to a certain extent.
It's showing minus 36 for me. So we are 40 seconds now, 50 seconds almost above the time. So yes, I guess we would close, right? Because this is the last session of a very full day. We want to say thank you really from the bottom of our hearts. It was really, you know, we didn't want to come here and just be presenting. We wanted to really have this conversation with you. And we're so happy that so many of you participated. And thank you so much for joining this conversation. Pedro, Karin, if you want to say something as well.
No, I think it's clear that in general, this community has a will to go forward and do something different, and we also know the limitations. And we will not fix everything, of course, in a day, but it's about we have good cases to learn from each other, and I think that's a way forward to actually learn from the good cases and use that to showcase what could be done better.
Thank you.